Right then. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy New Year to you all. Thank you for joining us for the first practitioner session of 2022. I hope you've all had a good break. So today we have our guest star, our rock star, Sharon Weaver, who is part of the Maturity Model core team. And we were looking for somebody who was quite good at business process. We looked around, and then really Sharon kept going, I'm a Six Sigma black belt. I know my stuff. And Sharon is perfectly suited to this. So we're going to talk about the business process competency as ever, looking at it again with a lens from the maturity model, but also looking at how we can make improvements to it. So please, if you've got some thoughts on that, then please let us know. So today we are going to do our usual, just in case you haven't been on this call before, talk about the maturity model and what it's all about, and where we are, and where we plan to be, and why it exists. Do our picture time, and then have our discussion with Sharon on business process. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I got to click in a different place. There we go. Sorry.
Okay, so we usually throw this slide up. It's been slightly updated from last time, which has been a couple of months. So we've got a little section here on the purpose of the maturity model and the practitioner sessions that we do. So what we're really interested in is trying to help organisations improve themselves with this technology underpinning, selecting amongst all of the different tools and techniques that they've got to make sure they choose to do the right thing in the right way and at the right level, so they don't spend all of their effort trying to do one part really, really well and forget about all the other things that they should be doing. And I'm not going to read them all out, but they're there. There's a bunch of different things that we try and do, but it's all about helping organizations choose how mature they want to be in different sort of aspects of their business. And those aspects are sort of represented on the right hand side with the competencies that we've been writing. We try and again look at it from a very much a business point of view, and so we have a set of different business competencies like business process, which is today's topic, and collaboration and communication, and all of these things which underpin what basically any business, enterprise to tiny, will have some activity around. And then we support that further with some supporting articles which perhaps go into the actual technology implementation itself rather than the principles and characteristics, and some tooling and some other things. There's a small section in the middle of in-progress competencies. We've done a bit of rationalization over the last 8 weeks just to make sure that we know what it is that we're still working on, and which ones are complete. So complete pile on the left, and then in progress in the middle. And we think we're going to try and get another 5 of these done by around mid-year. And then we're going to go and do a loop back and try and actually upgrade and improve all the ones that we've already got. So that's that bit. Next slide, please, Marc. So then we ought to take a look at, well, what are these competencies? In fact, what are these maturity model levels? And this is a really important slide for us. We have 5 levels, which we've chosen to name 100 through 500. And at level 100, that's your start out state where you haven't really thought about your approach to collaboration or what you're going to do to make business process work for you as an organization. You've just jumped in with both feet and you're paddling like mad and trying not to drown. And then we step up through the levels to try and improve your maturity. And we pick out level 300 as being a good place for any part of any business to be. If you're at level 300, you're not bad. You really, sound adequate, roadworthy, or whatever phrase you want to put in there. And if you're the kind of business, or you're in the kind of industry that needs to be better than okay, then we move up to level 400 and ultimately up to level 500. Very few organizations operate at 500. No organizations, in my experience, are 500 at everything they do. And it's perfectly right to be great at some things, adequate at others, and have some new departments, businesses, processes that are struggling to get up to level 300. That's that slide. And then Marc kindly moves on with hardly any prompt. And this is the same sort of thing again, but we've just pulled out these intents in the last column, just to try and make it a little bit easier for people to understand. What do we mean when we say we want to be, pretty decent? And so level 300 would be, we've got defined processes, policies, procedures. Most people seem to be doing the right thing with those most of the time, and we should keep that up. And that's a good place to be. And again, I'm not going to read the rest of these to you. The slides will be available later. Next slide. So just to finish this bit off, go on, Marc. I've got a hand over.
All right.
No, it's yours. I'm done.
Sorry. We want to make sure that you all have ways to get involved, and it can be anything from occasionally showing up to these calls to presenting a case study. We'd love to hear about what this model has done for you, and I'll have a little more about that on the next slide. We take contributions on GitHub. The whole thing, all of these documents, all of these articles, everything that we're putting out there for this model are open source. So we have this core team who work on it, but we certainly want to get input from all of you. We're not saying we're the authorities on anything, but we want to make sure that we get some good content out there and we continue to iterate. Ideas can come from lots of different ways. You don't have to know GitHub. You can get in touch with us. So another thing you can do is socialize the content. You can help us get the messages out there, retweet our tweets, repost our Facebook posts, whatever it is that we're doing out there in social media. Try to let people know that this exists. I think as a practitioner myself, I think that a lot of this would have been really useful years ago when I was first starting to think about how to use this platform, and hopefully it's good for everybody. So that's how you can potentially get involved. But we have one more thought here. We want to start collecting. It's 2022. What's new, right? We want to start thinking about collecting stories about how any of each or all of you have started to implement or use this model in your organizations. And it could be a good story or not such a good story, and it can be something that we can help you generalize so that it's not about this organization screwed up or this organization did great and here's how much money they made. We're interested in just perspectives on how you've used the model and where you saw the successes and where you thought that you could do better. If anybody has any thoughts there, you can ping any one of us on Twitter, on Carrier Pigeon, whatever it is, smoke signals. We all respond pretty easily. That we don't necessarily need to make this a big thing. It could be a paragraph. It could be something that feels more like a white paper. But we really want to start to collect information from all of you. What's working about this? What's not working? What would you like to tell other people? Next up, we have sort of where we're going on the next slides. And Simon D., I'm going to hand it back to you. I think you're muted.
First I'll have to unmute myself. I know I wasn't quite fast enough. So thanks, Marc. Future topics. Today with this process, which you all know, and then the next time in Feb, again the third week, whatever that is going to be. Is it going to be around the 21st, maybe? On Feb, we will be talking about compliance. So Simon Hudson has been working diligently with Nikki Chappie on the compliance competency. So they have made a bold statement that they're going to have that ready for Feb. So that's for
no pressure.
No, not at all. Right. So we just want to say thank you so much for everybody who joined us for November. We've got some other P&P stuff going on. So we've got the first time contributor sessions next week. on the 25th of January. There isn't a community doc session as yet, but I'm sure that will be happening soon. And of course, our next session, I got it wrong, it's the 15th of Feb. So we can discuss Valentine's, how Valentine's Day went, and have a chat about compliance. So we look forward to seeing you on that session. Right. So we've now get ready for the important time where we do PMP picture time. So if everyone could turn their videos on, and do we hand over to David? Is that the?
Yep, absolutely. I'll share my screen. You should all start seeing your.
You all want to be able
faces.
to say, "I was here once." You know, you want us to record you for posterity.
That's right. Still a few seats left. All right, I see some familiar faces, fantastic faces. All right.
Some very, very energetic, happy people. That's very nice to see.
All right, well, we are recording, so let's go crazy. Say hello, everybody. Woo!
Crazy is not a problem for me.
All right, excellent, excellent. Thank you all. We'll hand it back over.
Right then, so on to the main event now.
I have to represent. Hang on one sec. There we go.
Yeah, so on to the main event. We're going to be talking about business process and the competency. We've got Sharon, who is joining us today. Some impressive things going on there with, Microsoft Regional Director, Six Sigma Black Belt, even Microsoft Teams admin certified as well, and of course the obligatory QR code. So it's great to have Sharon here, stepping up and being our rock star this month. So thank you for doing that. I guess we hand over to you. Of course, just to say, for the for while this during the discussion, please give us some feedback. Clap, like, laugh, raise your hand if you have anything to say. We look forward to you being involved in our discussion. Over to you, Sharon.
Yeah, so I know we had talked a lot about, business processes and how they relate to the Microsoft Maturity Model. And so I had kind of gone through this and looked through for the points that, kind of would be helpful for people to really understand, what does it take to really make sure that I've got good, solid business processes, and how can I use that to mature my organization at a technical level. So I've spent, the bulk of my background has been in software development shops, application management, and then ultimately enterprise architecture and solution management. And these are kind of some tips and tricks that I found along the way that have been super helpful. And also, things to know kind of where you're at in the right place. So at a very, very boiled down introduction to all of this, I look at processes as things we do every day, but we just don't think about it. And how can we do those things, understand what we're doing, and then make them more efficient? And in our world, according to the Microsoft Maturity Model, ultimately what we're trying to do is introduce technology into something that is, by nature, not a technology-driven thing. And so what I try to really do is to say, okay, what are we doing as a process? Because everybody's doing organic processes, whether you know you're doing it or not, you're doing some sort of process innately. So we're doing this process, identify what that process is so that we understand what it is we're doing, get it documented, get it managed, get it controlled, get it maintained. And the idea of all of this is that when we get to a maturity point that we understand what our process is, we've identified it, we're documenting it, we're managing it to some degree, we now know what that process is. We have the ability to make changes in our process in a very controlled way. We can then introduce technology to automate those processes. We can introduce technology to report and do analytics on those processes. We can introduce technology to even do many of those processes for us. but we really have to know what that process is before we can ever get to the point that we can successfully automate it. Otherwise, all we're doing is automating a bad process. So that's just kind of high level, you know, kind of how we want to think about it. So on this slide, we start talking about 100. And like we mentioned before, this is just, we're doing what it takes to get it done. So in that whole kind of chain of events, this is, we're doing things and we're solving everyday problems, right? So some of the things that are on here, you know, nothing's defined. We're really just, every person's kind of doing their own thing. So maybe, you know, John says, you know, whenever I need somebody to sign it, I send it to Sally, and then Sally makes sure that the boss gets it and the paper goes on his desk. And if Sally's out of the office, then maybe the paper doesn't get signed for 2 weeks. That, you know, those types of things are happening. We're not dealing with any sort of exceptions, because anytime anything happens, you know, like I said, you know, somebody's out of the office, we hit a roadblock, we hit some sort of a delay. And I think the biggest thing of all of this is that processes change as needed, but there's basically no communication. So maybe Sally has this process that she does, but nobody knows what that is really. And so if something changes, nobody knows that she was doing that step. So it just kind of disappears. All right, let's move to 200. If anybody has any questions, comments, wants to bring anything up during this, feel free to stick your hand up or put a comment in the chat.
Well, I'm going to kick straight off, Sharon, because it's always good fun to be provocative. So, so what's wrong with level 100? You know, what are the consequences of that? You know, if that's my business, why and I own it, why should I be worried that that's what's going on?
Yeah, I think the biggest problems in level 100 is that because nothing's documented, well, or very little's documented, we're all just kind of doing what we need to do. Therefore, we don't know what we're doing right and we don't know what we're doing wrong. And so many times what will happen is we will have a bad process that could be consistently causing problems, but we don't know that that's what's actually causing the problem. I think more than anything, we don't understand. It's that we don't know what we don't know. So we don't understand what we're doing. Therefore, we could have continuously bad processes. If people leave, there could be things that are not accounted for. Many times, you know, when we talk about automation, you think about the manual steps of, like I mentioned, somebody goes out on vacation or maternity leave or steps away from a role, and a very significant step gets missed on a very regular basis. So I mean, I think it opens you up for a massive amount of risk in multiple different areas.
I guess as well, it's also about consistency, isn't it, too? So especially if you're, you know, dealing with customers, and you know, I was reading a book the other day, and it's talking about, you know, how the author stopped using a particular hairdresser because, you know, one time they had a great experience, the second time they didn't have a good experience, and then the third time they did have a really good experience again. And it, you know, it's that consistency, and that's you know, doesn't help sort of foster trust and things in your organization, so it can impact in that way too.
Yeah, you never know what to expect. It's a great point. You never know. And even in a, you know, if let's even say I'm doing something as simple as getting a form signed, if one time I'm taking it to one person, but then the next time that person goes, oh no, that's not me, you need to take it to a different person. I mean, that could be really confusing for users in general.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, when I work with clients, sometimes I say, you know, some processes should just be done on note cards, right? I mean, technology does not solve everything. And so, you know, being at level 100 with a process that isn't that important or happens very infrequently isn't a horrible thing. You really ought to be focusing on processes that are, you know, frequent and important, and making sure that you get those right. And if the technology can support doing those processes better, awesome. You know, the technology will not solve the fact that Bob's doing one thing and Betty's doing another thing, and Daphne decides that she's got her own way that she's going to do it. We have to agree on the process first and how important it is.
I think I see a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, when we speak about the business process competency, does the size of the company affect the maturity level? I mean, usually that's the case, right? And to what extent, if this is if this is like this?
I would say that the size of the company certainly has an impact, but I've seen very small organizations be incredibly organized on business process, and I've seen really large organizations be horrible at it. So, and you might think it's the other way around. I think larger organizations have more complexity to deal with, right, Sharon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference. I absolutely think that the size of the organization, the bigger you get, basically the more complex, and we're going to talk about this later, but at business process, we talk about variables and managing the variables and controlling the variables. Well, the larger the organization gets, the more variables you have to control. So I just think that, the more complex and the larger an organization gets, it's not that it's really harder, it's just that there's more to control. So one of the key things here too is, if you start when you're a smaller organization getting it right and being at a more mature level, as you grow that organization, it's going to be easier to stay a mature organization. Whereas if you wait until your organization is very large to begin that maturity growth, it's just going to take longer to get there.
And my observation over all these years is that large organizations are really lots and lots of small functioning units wedged together. And you're going to have a lot of, well, first of all, as such, large organizations are not large, they're small organizations, but there's just lots of them working together. And the second is that the complexity for large organizations is coordinating the way that they work. So it's just, I don't think that the maturity model changes. I don't think the fundamental levels change at all with the size of the organization. I think that there's just different types of characteristics and complexities in implementing what we have as a standard set of characteristics.
Yep, absolutely. So that kind of takes us to level 200. At level 200, oh, somebody popped a hand up. Do you want me to go ahead and take that question real quick?
Oh, my question is, we recently got acquired, and I was thinking, when two companies get acquired or merged, how do a company with a different maturity level merge with a company at a different level of maturity?
That's a good question.
Oh, that's a good one. Sharon, you're being quiet when people ask questions, so I'm intending to jump in. I've seen process coordination be one of the biggest pain points in an acquisition situation. The two organizations have different processes inherently. Even like, how do you ask for vacation? It's going to be different in both organizations. And reconciling all of those processes is actually one of the hardest things that happens in an M&A situation. It's a real challenge, and it's often where people struggle the most.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing, because when I've seen organizations that merge, I mean, the problem is there's so much going on. There's culture changes, there's technology changes, there's all those things, and usually there's one, I hate to say master company, right? There's one company that's like, we're going to use our technology or our processes. Usually you bring in something from the other one, but there's typically one that's kind of the lead. And I think, when we talk about maturity model, applying that back to the organization, kind of like Simon said, think of it as, there's two distinct units that essentially have their own maturity levels. And so when that merge kind of happens, there's this decision point of, well, where are you at on this and where are you at on that? And how can we kind of get on the same page?
Okay. Thank you.
That word culture is a biggie, right? Because process is often dictated by what the culture feels like. Some organizations are just really organized and focused and process driven. Some are more, self-empowerment kind of stuff. So that's what makes it hard.
Yeah, and as you see us move through the maturity model, even on this competency, you're going to notice the embedded cultural things that happen. And this is a conversation and a topic that we've brought up multiple times throughout the maturity model, is that as these things become more mature, there's a culture shift that actually happens underneath it that really kind of becomes, instead of being siloed in department level or group level or team level, it starts to really kind of, be pervasive through the entire enterprise. And I think that's no different, you know, and it's when you're bringing in another group, it's what culture is going to essentially win and take over. And it's making sure that that culture is supporting this kind of constant maturity growth as you build. So level 200, so we talked about level 100. Level 100 is this idea of, okay, we're just kind of all doing what we need to do to survive. We're making it happen, but we don't really, we haven't really formalized a whole lot of stuff. But getting into level 200, we're starting to manage things. You know, we're starting to understand that we need some consistency. So we're starting to maybe loosely define, we're definitely starting to document things, maybe building some process maps. The problem is that 9 times out of 10, when I go into an organization and I help them with a level 2, I can kind of tell they're level 200 because they've started doing process maps. They've started writing things down. They've started having these discussions. Maybe they're even using, you know, these little kind of what I call baby workflows, right? Like approval workflows or collect feedback workflows, things like that. But the biggest thing I think that I notice is that a lot of times they've got it written down, but nobody's looked at it, you know, maybe ever. Maybe they wrote it down at the beginning and they put it in a file. And so I go in and I say, do you have a process map that we can go over? And they're like, oh yeah. And then they go to their file cabinet and they pull out something from 3 years ago. And I'm like, okay, when's the last time anybody looked at this? When's the last time anybody maybe even had a discussion about this? And they're like, oh, well, we documented it at the beginning and we signed off on it. We put it in the drawer. So, I mean, I think that's the big thing is it's been written down and maybe they're trying to automate some steps. You're starting to see citizen developers really kind of reach out and say, hey, I know that I can use some of these technology tools to make my job easier, to maybe do some approvals. You know, we're responding to some specific business use cases. But ultimately, you know, at the end of the day, the final bullet there is that there's often inconsistency between the process, whatever's written down, and what's actually happening. And so when I get into a place that's at a level 200, they've recognized that there needs to be some sort of formalization. They've probably attempted it at some point, but what they're doing is not always in line with what they've defined. And most of the time, they're not checking it. They're not holding anybody accountable. They're not going back and looking at that. They're just kind of maybe a little better than they were. And at a cultural level, I think they're starting to realize, like it's like this little light bulb of they're starting to realize, hey, maybe we could be better if we started to do something with this, but they just haven't quite gotten there yet. Any questions or comments at the 200 level? All right, let's go to 300.
Ooh, we're just going to jump right up to another level.
Well, and you know what's really funny that I noticed is 100 is kind of scattered. 200 is kind of this light bulb moment, right? And I talk to people all the time because 200 a lot of times is where clients call me. 200 is the point where we have reached the stage where we realize we need help. We realize that we want to do better. We realize that we want to formalize. We realize that we want to, you know, get something out of it.
Sharon, if I may, I want to reinforce that point. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, the 200 people are going, we know this is really important. We just either can't do it ourselves or we can't get around to doing it ourselves. But you know, at least they're trying for the most part, and it could be like a skill, like a resource, like all sorts of things. But you know, give them credit, they're trying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually, you brought up a really good point, because a lot of times I'll do an assessment for a company. And one of the big points that we notice is that they really want to, but you're absolutely right. They don't have the resources to do it, or they don't have the knowledge to do it, right? Those are big things that are missing. And so, so when we get to level 300, essentially we've made that realization. Often people will have dedicated resources to make this happen. They will have hired resources in. A lot of times when we're at the 300 level, they've already come in and they've started to do something. So one of the things that is really big at the 300 level, I think, is that now we have resources dedicated to this particular thing. And we might have a BPM group, or we might have a Six Sigma group, or we might just simply have, you know, somebody who's dedicated to organizing things. But at some level, business process management is now centralized at the enterprise level with a team or one or more resources that are dedicated to this. Simon, did you have another comment, or did you still have your hand up?
I'll put it down.
No, you're fine. Just want to make sure. And I think the second big thing that I've noticed is at a level 300, not only have we now kind of centralized this and started to throw resources at it, but quality. So, and that's a really big word in the business process world, is quality. And so at levels 1 and 200, we just want to get stuff done. Like we're just trying to get it done. At level 300, we're really starting to care about this idea of quality. So what are we doing and what level are we doing at? What kind of feedback are we getting? What are the results doing for us? We're starting to analyze what we're doing, and we're starting to think about that at a statistical level. So quality really starts to matter at the business process level, so we can identify, ROI at a level we haven't really thought of before. Yes, Marc.
I never raised my hand. I know you probably think that's a little weird. So we had a question that I think is worth hitting on. Is this level 200 only restricted to IT, or is it applied to business processes within the organization? All of this applies to everybody in the organization. Yet at the same time, you may decide that some processes are fine at 100 and some really have to be level 400, right? So it is something that you apply based on how you see the processes in your organization and their importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what you're going to see is different departments, and it always depends. Like, it's not really a departmental type thing. I tend to notice it more when there's like somebody in the department that's more of an evangelist that is like, I really want this to be better. Sometimes if you get something that's process savvy or tech savvy, then sometimes that department will kind of become a leader. I personally, when I go into organizations, tend to work with IT more than most other groups, just because of the nature of what I do. But what I try to help my IT organizations understand is that they not only need to be the leader and kind of eat their own dog food at the technology level, but to be successful, they really need to also be eating their own dog food at the business process level, because IT is notorious for not really, considering a lot of the business process ramifications underlying the technology. And so by them kind of being the leader in that space, it gets some of the business units to really recognize how important that is to things like automation and streamlining things down the road. So you're absolutely right. It's across all departments, but I find, whatever group I'm consulting with, I just really push them to kind of be the leader in that area, so that they can, make sure that other people are seeing them do it the correct way, and it's maturing the organization that way.
It's interesting though. You see a lot of organizations where IT is trying to push this on everyone else, but then they won't apply it to themselves. Good
Exactly.
processes are good processes. Calling the help desk ought to be a consistent exercise, and it often isn't. Sorry, Simon.
That's what I know. I should raise my hand.
I
but
did
it's a
not.
really good point. It's a really good point though for adoption, isn't it? The one thing about the IT processes are that they get visibility across the organization, and that then makes people like, how have you done this? The success stories, that then improves the adoption, and IT can sort of show off and show what can be done, the art of the possible, which really helps then the organization foster and build up on that business process or business processes within the organization. So
well, and on top of that, IT tends to have more access to the technology. Typically, they have more access to the technology. So I find that if they are really good about really solidifying those business processes and building the technology on those processes early on, as they're pushing out that change management and the adoption and the awareness of the technology, I feel like it also fosters kind of that want in other businesses to be able to use it, because they don't have to wait to get to it. So if the IT department's already kind of solidified that business process at a good level, and then they're adding technology to it, they can do that a little bit earlier sometimes than the business departments can. And so I think it just helps your user adoption if they do it that way. Yeah. So some of the other things that we're going to look at level 300. So we talked about this idea of it's centralized. We have resources. We're focusing on quality. We've got process maps that are documented like they were before, but now we're maintaining them. We're keeping an eye on them. We're updating them. So, we're like, if a process changes, typically we're going to go back in and we're going to update that process map to make sure that it's fairly current. I wouldn't say like, people are like super duper on top of it, but it's definitely fairly well maintained. The other big thing that we start looking at is that we start meeting, and this is that whole conversation, we start meeting to say, can we do this at an enterprise level? And the organizations that I work with that are at level 300 are starting to take those departmental representatives or team representative or group representative. Those silos are starting to come together and say, okay, we may each have our own needs. However, I'm handing off something to you and you're handing off somebody to them. And so we need to really think of this holistically at an enterprise level. And so they're starting to have those meetings. They're starting to facilitate those needs. They're starting to build things like common data sets and master data management. They're starting to say, okay, can we do these single resources that everybody can have access to? They also start bringing in the idea of third-party tools. And this is where, when we start talking about, do we need a business process management tool? Do we need additional software? Do we need to build custom? Do we need a data warehouse? Like those conversations really start coming up because we're starting to now not only throw people resources at this, but now maybe we have business initiatives and we have financial backing to say, how can we take this to the next level? How can we invest in these solutions so that we're getting a bigger ROI back to us at an enterprise level? And much like the process maps, any automated solutions are starting to become reviewed. We're writing them down, we're understanding them, we're figuring out how they fit into the bigger whole. And we're also starting to look at citizen development for what it is, not just letting people do what they want, not just making it part of the process, but also understanding, hey, there are going to be day-to-day needs, like Marc said, that don't necessarily have anything to do with our whole systems approach that these citizen developers are going to need to do their day-to-day activities. And we need to empower them, train them, and give them the resources to do the things that they need to do.
I think it's really, you talk about those common data sets and common tools. That's also really important from an adoption. If you've got lots of different tools, it's confusing for users. It's not so much maybe for people like ourselves or that those early adopters, but it is for people when you want to bring the rest of the organization on. It's make it less confusing. So I think it's a really good point to make, having that common set of tools.
Yep. Yeah, Nikki, single source of truth. That is a fantastic way to put it. That's, we got to have, where is it we go back to know that the data is correct? Looks like Edmund has his hand up.
Yeah, hi. So we're all probably used to thinking about information architecture as a kind of concept in these things. Do you think there's a concept of standardized process architecture to take into businesses as well?
Absolutely.
How might we kind of frame that in a way that we can roll it out in across multiple departments for a business?
Yeah, so this is really core to the Six Sigma program. I've participated in some pretty high level mature organizations, and the way that we handle that is essentially like, in my world, we had a portal, we had a SharePoint portal that essentially contained every single business process that we had for the organization. They were identified, they were organized, and we'll get to that here at another level. But we basically had everything very consistent in the same place. It had a, naming convention, and then we had a review process for all of those processes. So once again, this is, we are now a centralized team of resources that are reviewing those business processes. They're all centralized. We've got them written down. We're managing them. And it's just a matter of there's multiple options, everything from custom software to third software that can actually store that information and keep it available to the organization. Marc, did you have a comment? No? Okay. You had that look on your face. All right, let's go to 400, because as we're talking about this kind of, as we're getting more mature, so you can kind of see this building, right? We're getting more organized, we're documenting things. So remember I said first we identify things, then we define to know what it is, then we start managing it. Well, now we have done all those things, and so now people know what to expect. This is that idea of, if I do something, I know the process is going to be the same every time, or at least really close to the same. And so, at level 400, we start becoming predictable. We start understanding, and this is that question, Edmund, of how do I organize that so that everybody kind of knows what is out there and what to expect and how to go for it. And so what we're doing now is, all of our solutions are led with this idea of how is it going to impact the organization as a whole? How is it going to impact things that hand off to each other? We're also doing training, and that's training, in my opinion. When you start seeing organizations that are doing training, especially mandatory training, then you are seeing an organization that has reached a point of maturity. Because when you're investing in building all of this stuff out, you don't want it to just sit and go stale. You want your users to know what it is and how to use it. So not only are we making it, but we're also then organizing it, and we're rolling that out to the organizations so that they understand we have this centralized documentation. We've defined all of our business processes. Here is where you can access it. And this enterprise registration, right? Usually there's some place, some portal, some software that essentially lists, here's every single BPM, every process map, every, system that we have set up across the organization. Here's APIs of how to get information out of different systems, how to get different data points. We want to know, what risk level are these processes at, who owns them, what technology is associated with them, and do they interact with any other processes or systems? This becomes true enterprise architecture, information architecture, of really understanding what's impacting what. I think one of the big things at this level that I've really noticed is, we have this bullet: processes have clear ownership and resilient to changes. So when I start coaching people and consulting people on how to build a process, number one, who's responsible for it? Who's making sure that it's going to stay up to date? Who's going to make sure that it's being held accountable? Who's going to make sure that it's being done correctly? And also, are we building processes and automation with the idea of using things like groups? That way, if a person moves in and out of a role for whatever reason, the process or the system or the solution doesn't change. It's just simply a person moving from one role to another role. We automatically know how to backfill that information, that training, that knowledge, the permissions, whatever. So this resiliency to change keeps things very, very predictable. Obviously, we've talked about the fact that it's now monitored. So now we're keeping an eye on it. We're controlling it. We're starting to establish things like metrics and reporting. So we're starting to kind of understand it. And I really love these last two bullet points because, first of all, any user can kind of get in to see this registration or this list of options. But not only that, they can actually start to see how the processes are functioning. So we become very transparent to the end user in terms of, what are our analytics, what are our audit trails, where am I at in the queue even, right? So before I would submit, I want to purchase a pen from the admin, and I might or might not get it, and who knows when. Now I can fill out a form that says I need a pen. I submit it. I can now see the status of my request, who's gotten it, when it's expected to be delivered, if there's anything required of me for something to happen. We're starting to have that feedback that's happening back to the end user to say, we've now gotten all of this so controlled and so predictable that we can tell you, maybe even within a window, what to expect, when to expect, what to do. So we start to have that two-way conversation. And because of that, at the bottom, we see there becomes this very well understood continuum of citizen development. So the idea is now, if somebody needs to do something, they have the ability to go do what they need to do for this day-to-day immediate process need. But if that needs to grow into something that's more of a system-wide solution or department-wide solution, there's actually a path to get there. And so I can go to that business process portal. I can say I want to do something that somebody or a resource is likely going to help me walk through that. We're going to define the process. We're going to say, do you just need something for today or for the next few weeks? Or do you need something that's bigger? And then let's coach you through that process and let's train you through that process so that ultimately, if you've come up with this fantastic idea that's going to make our world more efficient and more predictable, maybe that's something that we could take all the way to the top and deploy across the organization and bring value to the organization. I think I still see a hand up. Does somebody have a question? Edmund, did you still have a question or did you still have your hand up? Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. Nope, you're fine. All right, questions about 400 or comments about 400?
So what organisations or parts of organisations do you think should be aiming to run processes at 400? Who are the candidates for kicking up as far as that, rather than just saying 3's fine?
Yeah, so I mean, we think about industries, I think, that are a little bit more concerned. I mean, obviously, I think everybody should, try to be as mature as possible, but I think industries where details are very important. So we think of things like, especially in Six Sigma, we think of manufacturing, anything that's got a really heavy operational undercurrent, construction, obviously IT. So when you think about things that have a lot of moving parts, things that have a high level of risk. So engineering is very heavy in the Six Sigma world, and that's a lot of my background is working in engineering, because when you think about a process in engineering, if a bridge doesn't get designed with the right material at the right time in the right way, it could collapse, right? This is really a big deal. And so those processes have to be very, very consistent, and you have to be able to measure them, and you have to be able to understand them, because that ultimately creates a deliverable that has a high level of risk. And so I think when we think of industries that are very detail-oriented, require a lot of operational knowledge, or have a very high level of risk, then they require and demand a much higher level of maturity. You go to your doctor, you want to know that they're following a process that is ultimately going to end in something predictable that is a low level of risk for you, right? And so I always think about, what's the level of risk, and is that something that they need to control? And the more you need to control that, the more mature you need to be.
So, I mean, this is top of mind stuff for me, because when I run a medtech company and I'm busily writing the compliance and governance competency at the moment, and the processes around compliance and governance, they're business processes. They may or may not use a degree of technology, but all of this stuff, those kinds of industries, they've got to be at 400. The industry bodies, the clients just require it, and 300 just mostly isn't enough.
Agreed. Yeah, you really want to start having ownership and accountability, and you want to be able to assess that risk, right? Especially in an industry. Well, and then when you get into regulatory requirements too, right? Anything that's got a regulatory requirement, you're going to need to be able to assess that risk and provide that back. So therefore, this process level gives you the ability to assess that risk accurately and be able to provide reporting on it, which really helps.
Absolutely, and it's really important, because if I get this stuff wrong, I get to go to jail.
Right.
So that's an incentive for your executives.
I don't think it's a one size fits all thing in most cases. I always think of the organizations at the top of business process being like Boeing, NASA, Airbus. Lives are at stake, reputation. I mean, one plane crashes and right. So at the same time, those organizations tend to be really difficult to get simple things done, right? Like, I want a new drinking fountain on the second floor. Well, that's a 3-year process. So you should really be right sizing the way you think about each process based on its importance, as opposed to trying to be level 400 or 500 at everything. It should be the key processes that make your organization successful. And so, the 80-20 rule may apply here, or whatever. But I think when you get to level 400 or 500, you're making cognizant decisions and saying, the drinking fountain thing really doesn't require this ginormous process. Let's make that decision and make that one a simpler thing to do. So the fact that you've decided not to make it complex is an indicator that you're at a higher level.
That's a fantastic point. And when we think about this centralized team of resources reviewing essentially any process that's coming through, one of the things that I've also noticed is that often they are heavily involved in steering committees and business initiative decisions and things like that. So when we have our business initiatives for the year and what we're going to fund, a lot of times that business process group is part of making decisions for how complex and how complicated is each business initiative and how much effort should we be putting into it? Is this something that we could do at a lower level, or is this something we really need to take to a higher level? So I think that's absolutely part of something, and it's probably something we're thinking at a level 400. Is, you know, starting to look through those business initiatives, starting to become advisors to the executive group. So that's another key piece of this, right? Instead of everybody kind of doing what they need to do, we are now functioning as a whole, as a group, as an enterprise, and this team tends to then become advisors to the organization as a whole in terms of, you know, what makes sense to focus on and how complex is that thing that we're trying to accomplish. So let's go ahead and get to 500.
Nirvana.
Yeah, I mean, 500 is really the idea that we're doing 400 successfully, right? We're doing 400, we're at that. And not only are we there, but now everybody's very comfortable with the 400 level. People are providing feedback, everything's standardized. But when you get to a level 500, everything is so predictable and everything is documented and managed and controlled to a point that now we can become innovative, right? And this is where that cultural piece comes in, is that the level 500, we're now not only training our people and providing advice and having those business processes be documented, but now we have people coming in and innovating. So we have power users coming in and really creating, you know, new workflows and new automation. Things are reaching outside of our organization because our organization is so well under control that we can now include others in those day-to-day processes, in those automations. We're measuring things, we're providing feedback, we're using analytics, maybe using more advanced tools, doing benchmarking against other places. So now we're taking this and we're becoming innovative, not only within our own organization, but probably within our industry. So we're taking that, we're going out to our industry, we're doing the things, we're showing them how it's meant to be done, probably getting a business advantage because of this, and becoming advisors to other people in that same industry a lot of times. But I think the biggest thing to really realize at this level is that not only are we doing it, not only are we doing it predictably, not only are we training people, but we are encouraging our users to innovate and grow and come up with better things. And if new technology comes along, we're not afraid of it. Change is not a bad word in this organization. You know, we're really, like, every time something comes up, where that centralized group is evaluating, is this something we need to review? Is this something we need to change? Can we be better? Can we go forward? And not only do that, but do it in a very controlled and measured way. Any questions?
There was a question about KPIs, and I've lost it. But
Okay.
but Nikki also made the point about ISO 7001 or ISO 9000. You know, I think when you were on level 400, but you want to sort of touch on some of that industry certification.
Yeah, so if you're ISO compliant, they regularly come in and audit, and they're going to want to basically, I mean, I've actually led multiple ISO audits, and they come in and they're like, I want to see every single process map. I want to see all your automations. I want to know that when I click on buttons, they do what it says in the process map, right? Really, that's what it comes down to. And so to be ISO certified, not only do you have to have all of that stuff in place, but you have to prove that every single thing that's written down, every single thing you click on actually does what the process map says it'll do. And by doing that, they're saying you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so you get that certification because you're at that maturity level where you're actually holding yourself accountable to do the things you say you're doing. The other comment on here was, our KPIs supposed to be fixed and secure by 400? I mean, I would really hope KPIs are probably fixed and secure before 400, but whether or not we're documenting them, measuring them, and making them available for other people, I think by 400, other people should definitely be able to see them, and the analytics are coming back. But I think, you know, KPIs probably happen more in 200 and 300 than people realize, but by 400, they're definitely documented and measured and analyzed and being used as part of everything.
Just
Sharon,
to put my tuppence worth in. Just on the ISO thing though, because I also used to be an ISO auditor, and I would say that yes, absolutely, ISO is a level 400 activity. And I think you can have a great or a good ISO certified company, and the great ones are pushing 500 in places, but 400 is where ISO tends to take you.
Yep, agreed. Let's pop
Andy
to the last slide real quick because I know we're running short.
Andy Burns had a question. I don't want to lose. He asks, do you see the business owning these processes? The lines seem to be blurred on what IT's role is in the digital workspace other than the governance police.
I think at the beginning, the separate departments, teams, areas tend to own the processes. As you mature, by the time you're at a level 300 or 400, typically there is, like I said, a dedicated group or a dedicated resource that is typically in charge of business process as a whole. And so an IT at that point, theoretically, should be a support tool, resource pool for that business process group, and they should have their own business processes that they're following. But ideally, it's going to move into the business in some way as a centralized group across the entire organization.
And there's another question from Stilian. I think Simon H. or Simon D. You might want to answer this one. Are there any publicly available surveys that could be used by companies to self-assess their maturity level across all competencies?
By golly, we do.
Yes. Simon Hudson's, we did a session, probably on the list of recordings, actually talking about the tools which we've built to help us analyze the maturity of your organization. There is a link in the slides actually as well further up, so but we'll grab that and pop it on the chat.
So just a few resources. I know we're kind of tight on time, but here's a few. Actually, pop back real quick.
Sorry, I was going to go grab that link, and of course, I'm doing it in front of everyone. There you go.
I've got you back, Mark.
So just a quick few resources, and there's quite a few things on here, but we talked about the idea of really understanding what your process is, and that really comes from gathering good requirements. If you want to learn more about requirements, IABA.org is just the place to go. My background is in business analysis. I'm still a member of the IABA. They will give you everything you need to know. When we start talking about, process modeling, Lean is a really good foundation for understanding like Six Sigma and process modeling, efficiency, risk, things like that. I put in Mountain Goat Software. So Mountain Goat Software is very well known for being a good Agile resource. And when we think about Lean has kind of come into Agile. And if you want to know about Agile process modeling and Agile terms and things like that, Mountain Goat Software is one of the leaders in that area. We also talked about the term quality, and ASQ is like basically the benchmark for all organizations in terms of quality and Six Sigma. Their Six Sigma black belt is one of the highest regarded black belts there are. So if you want to learn more about that, or if you want to look into getting your own Six Sigma yellow belt or green belt or black belt, you can go to ASQ. Togaf is one that I learned across the way. Togaf is it's open source enterprise architecture. Essentially, all the knowledge is completely free to you. And so you can go out to Togaf and just learn about enterprise architecture, information architecture, and get certified through them. And then I know my books are not quite as mushy as some of the last presenters, but honestly, the Six Sigma Green Belt Handbook is fantastic for all of this because it walks you step by step through how to basically make sure your organization is following good, solid business process modeling skills. The BABOK is part of IABAs, and they now have a business process certification as well, so they've added a lot of business process knowledge to that. And then really what we're all about is making sure that everybody knows what to do. And my go-to book for change management is Who Moved Cheese, and actually a second one now. But I think when we think about why people do what they do from a process perspective, that's probably one of my favorite. It's a light read. And if you're just getting into the world of business process, it's just a fantastic place to start.